Okay, I think we are live. I have um I have also got this streaming over on Odyssey. If anyone is interested in using that, I think Odyssey is great personally. I think it's a great alt tech, and it was set up at a time when we didn't have very many options really as streamers or as people kind of with interesting things to say or nationalists or whatever, following the Great Purge, 2017 to 2019 kind of era. And Odyssey has been really, really good, I would say, to us. So it's good to support it. And if people would like to go over there and watch, you're absolutely welcome to do that. I haven't been able to get streaming on Rumble as of yet. Hopefully, the audio is going pretty good. I'll just have a quick check. Yeah, it seems pretty good. So, welcome everybody. Tonight's stream will be concerning. Well, we're basically building on what we did last time with Last True Gale. We analyzed these two reports called the Future 40 reports. One was dealing with demographics, and the other was dealing with the economic planning, long-term economic planning, basically. And we did about 2.5 hours or almost 3 hours talking about that and analyzing it from a kind of an ideological perspective, comparing it to the kind of earlier 90s economic integration model that was being pursued during the Haughey era, basically. And we kind of came to a number of conclusions. One being this is very much heavily weighted towards green agenda, sustainable development. And tonight we're going to look at the institution that actually prepared these reports and how it came to be, because this actually relates very closely to the changes that have been occurring in Ireland really since the Troika era. So I'm just going to run through a little bit of background material. I like to look at background material before I start getting into these kinds of specific things. But just to summarize what Future 40 is, if you're not that familiar with it, very briefly. Future 40 basically was introduced basically this year. The reports were published this year by Minister Paschal O'Donoghue. He was now gone to the World Bank, of course. Good luck with his new job. But basically, the Future 40 report followed recommendations made in the Commission on Welfare and Taxation's 2022 report, Foundations for the Future, which I'll just mention in a moment. And tonight's stream really is about what process brought all this about, okay? Because basically, Future 40 is built on the back of this thing called the Commission on Welfare and Taxation. And this thing was obviously created beforehand. And it really struck me as I was researching this just during the week there, because I kind of knew there was a little bit of backstory that I hadn't gone into there 2 weeks ago. But I realized a few weeks ago, during the week, that there's actually a really interesting kind of story here. And that is that you actually see the influence of the Labour Party in a big way, operating institutionally through all of this, for reasons that will become more apparent. And it really speaks to, because I knew there was a big social transformation agenda and change that came in with the Troika era. But the institutions that are kind of managing our economic and social planning future all kind of emanate really from this era and decisions that were taken at this time. So I think it's really worthwhile to kind of spend a little bit of time tonight, maybe an hour or so, just kind of explaining who this commission was and how it kind of came about. So Future 40 basically takes this kind of long-term demographic approach, basically, and we went through all that. And it's full of basically, green agenda, sustainable development, and of course, the reality that immigration is going to have to be, a factor of our future, basically, for the foreseeable future. And even then, we're looking at a fairly dim future from what we could glean from those reports, basically. So that's the Future 40 report. Check out the stream I did with Last True Gale. It's the last stream I did with him, and you can learn all about that. So I'm using Copilot this evening because Copilot's kind of a good little. It's good. I've researched all this independently, but Copilot's a good way of presenting it to people on screen. And a number of things happened in 2011, basically. So as you know, in 2011, basically, you had the coalition government of Fine Gael and the Labour Party came in. And they had a huge mandate, really. The country was on its knees economically. There'd been the huge crash. Fianna Fáil were absolutely annihilated. And Fine Gael and Labour kind of went into this coalition. And there was some optimism that things would change for the better. And I would argue that that's questionable. How, I mean, yeah, I suppose things are better in some ways, but I would say the vision and the kind of system that we're living under now kind of comes out of this era, and we have to understand it. So one of the things they did was they created an economic management council, which is now defunct. I think that ended in about 2016. But the economic management council was basically four people. It was basically the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, so that's Enda Kenny, the Taoiseach, and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Brendan Howlin, and the Minister for Finance, Noonan, Michael Noonan. Now, the interesting thing about this was like kind of like a war cabinet, basically, and you'll find a lot of articles basically criticizing this, saying that it's unconstitutional, um, and overly technocratic and unaccountable and all the rest of it. And you will find that people like, for example, Fintan, our great friend Fintan O'Toole, was a big critic of this at the time, and a lot of the left wing people generally weren't too fond of it. But basically, it was to get the country moving again. Okay, so, and I can kind of understand the reason, and also there was the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council was great at the same time. But this little group was kind of in charge of the country for a few years. They really had a lot of power, and so the interesting thing was is that they actually split as well in that government, that 2011 government. It also split the Department of Finance into the Department of Finance and this new uh, Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, basically. And so co-pilot explains here. So I asked it to explain, basically summarize how the Department of Finance was restructured, basically. And so in 2011, their Department of Finance was restructured and effectively split into two separate departments, the Department of Finance and the newly created Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. So you had Fine Gael Labour basically had one of these each. So the Department of Finance was controlled by Fine Gael with Noonan, and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform was Howlin at the time. And the Taoiseach, of course, was Joan Burton. And that was another kind of controversial decision. It was seen as like, well, this is a little bit, how is this going to work? Are we doubling up on work? There was all the usual the complaints about transparency, but some people say it was quite successful. So I just want to explain that those were some of the big structural things that were changed at this time. And following that, the next kind of big shake-up that you get basically under Minister Paschal O'Donoghue is this new Commission on Taxation and Welfare, which was established in April 2021, based on a commitment in the Programme for Government of 2020. And this is where you begin with Future 40, basically. This is the institutional beginning of Future 40. And so the Programme for Government, Ben, had set that out as a priority. It was established April 2021. And this Professor Niamh Maloney was the chair, and she's a very important person in terms of world financial planning. Basically, she's a very eminent professor. She's at the London School of Economics. I think she ran the Department of Law, the law school, basically at the London School of Economics. And of course, if you know your Fabian law or whatever, the London School of Economics is very kind of famously a Fabian institution. In terms of it represents really the kind of what in modern times would be called the kind of third way, or the kind of democratic socialist kind of form of left liberal kind of approach to politics and society. And it was formed originally, of course, by the Fabians, by Beatrice and Sidney Webb, George Bernard Shaw, and it was seen as a kind of a new model institution at the time. It's a very famous institution at this point. I don't go in for the kind of conspiratorializing about a lot of these things. I view the LSE as just, it takes a more technocratic kind of approach. It's associated with more technocratic forms of governance and everything. So it's just interesting. It's just interesting to note that. But this commission that was created, basically, anyway, she chaired it, and I think there was 13 people on it. It was an independent commission, and it liaised with the Department of Finance, and of course it published this report, Foundations for the Future, which I have opened here. It's very long. I'm not going to analyze the report, but it's basically making the similar it's basically the origin of Future 40. Basically, it's kind of it's the ethos of Future 40. There's 160 odd recommendations in that report, basically, and to briefly summarize them, I suppose we could say. I use Grok for this. I find Grok actually can be sometimes better than Copilot for summarizing large texts. But yeah, the overall approach of the Commission then, strategic directions, broaden the tax base. This was the big kind of push. Fear of the burden of corporate tax, basically, and propping up the tax system. So they want to broaden the tax, move away from taxes on labor, such as PRSI, so USC, so income tax, as the population ages, based on demographics. And there's a number of things here which I find very dangerous, basically. Site value tax, property tax increases, this kind of thing. I think this kind of stuff can basically just be a way of screwing people over, really. But there's a lot of the green stuff here. So this document is very heavily weighted towards the green agenda. And the Grok actually gives a really good analysis of the kind of the perspectives that are at the forefront of it. So you have the Department of Finance fiscal hawk perspective, which was considered the strongest influence, and the Commission Secretariat was provided by the Department of Finance. And so the Secretariat is really the key thing here. So you have the Commission itself, which is like these 13 or 14 experts, basically, mainly financial people, chaired by the aforementioned Niamh Maloney. But then there's the Secretariat, which is within the Department of Finance. And I'll explain later why that was very important and who was actually leading that and why it's very, very interesting. And so the overriding priority was long-term fiscal sustainability in an aging society, and preparing for the fall in corporate tax receipts. And so the other main lobby was the mainstream Irish economic commentariat, competitiveness at all costs lobby. So this is the ERSI, the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, and former senior officials who have spent decades defending the low tax pro FDI model. And so that's the kind of, you're thinking there of like even technocrats, basically. But then, of course, Grok actually highlights what is very obvious in this, is that there's this kind of centrist technocratic social partnership thing as well. And you have the trade unions, basically, that public mainly, and they are all mainly public sector trade unions in Ireland. And the trade unions are very much represented in the employer bodies. So you have IBEC and you have the ICTU. And so the ICTU, basically, they have their own think tank, and it's called, I'll show you now, it's called the Nevin Economic Research Institute. And it's basically supported by the trade unions, basically. They support this thing. And so that was founded in 2011 as well, interestingly, to kind of move the trade union movement towards using research to push for their own agenda, basically. And so these are the stakeholders. You have the technocratic central planners within the Department of Finance. You have the experts coming in from LSE and all the rest of it. And of course, you have the IBEC and you have the trade unions represented through their lobby. And so let's get into who these people are. So so I asked for this quick summary here of Niamh Maloney, for example, of the London School of Economics. She's a leading scholar in EU financial markets regulation, currently serving as Professor of Financial Markets at the London School of Economics. She studied law at Trinity College and Harvard Law School, and has held major academic, regulatory, and advisory roles across Europe. And her current like roles and everything, she's had very, very important roles. For example, at the Bank of England, she's an external member of the Prudential Regulation Committee currently, and she was on the Central Bank of Ireland board as well, or I think they call it the committee or something. But very, eminent person. I don't think she has any particular political connections. Just a very competent person, basically, in that area. And Royal Irish Academy. And so this report, basically, then Foundations for the Future. runs into like literally 500 pages, so I'm not going to be analyzing it. But it was actually considered such an important document when it was published in 2022 that they literally gave it an award, the Fiscal Social Contract, how taxation can be applied as a tool of social good in Irish society. So this is held at the Royal Irish Academy in 2023, in Dublin. And this event, it's actually really interesting just to show you like how relevant, how important this report was seen as being. And so social contract theory, as espoused by philosophers Rousseau and Hobbes, is conceptually straightforward, an arrangement in which individual rights are yielded to government for the sake of the collective interest. Essentially, the arrangement is a reciprocal one between the people and those whom governance has been assigned. The tax system of a country is a microcosm of the social contract, in that citizens pay tax and in turn receive public goods and services. The population is sent to pay taxes only as long as they value what they gain from it. Social contract theory is at the heart of the tax discussion, as it defines the framework of our fiscal relationship with government. In the face of permacrises, there is an opportunity to rethink fiscal policy to ensure a social contract that delivers resilience, social cohesion, and social justice, which is built on the foundation of a fair and flourishing economy. And so, yeah, this report actually received an award. I didn't actually archive that, but okay. So, the other important individual in all of this, in relation to actually producing this report, is actually this guy called Colm O'Reardon, who was the main connection basically within the Department of Finance Secretariat. Basically, he led the Secretariat in the Department of Finance, and he basically, I believe, is probably the most important person, because his Secretariat basically drafted the report, and so it seems that, and AI seems to confirm this, that he was probably the main figure really in all of this, in terms of the overall drafting and the production of the final report. Some of the actual contributors to the report didn't stand over every chapter. For example, I believe the guy from the Nevin Research Institution, for example, didn't actually stand over one of the chapters, for example, because he didn't think it was sufficiently, trade union friendly or whatever. But regardless, he's an interesting character. So I'll have to explain some of his biography, and you'll kind of see where the Labour thing comes in. So he's actually the brother of Aidan O'Reardon, who many of us will know as a Labour politician. And he actually has been involved historically in the Labour Party himself. And so I think it's really interesting that I think you really see here the institutional representation of the Labour Party within government. You see it here with this report, particularly through O'Reardon. So just to briefly summarize some of his bio. Here we are. Oh, hang on, I have it on a different tab. I'm sorry. I have a different set of tabs for that. So this is Colm O'Reardon, Aidan's brother, and a very, very accomplished man in his own right, basically. So I believe the family is from Malahide, but Colm O'Reardon, he is currently the Secretary General of the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science since September 2023. We'll briefly explain his career trajectory in a moment, but basically, I believe this guy will actually be central to the reform of Irish education as well. And knowing Aidan's ideology, and I believe it was Colm that actually got Aidan into the Labour Party back in the early 2000s. So he is a Labour man, and I think it's very important that people know who some of these people are. So before coming to the department, he was head of the Strategic Economic Development Division in the Department of Finance. And if any of you remember what that was, that is the thing that produced the two aforementioned Future 40 reports. So having basically led the secretariat which produced the report of the Commission on Taxation and Welfare, which was his previous role, he then moved straight into the Department of Finance for a year or so and kind of kicked off the transforming of, or the translation of that basic report and its ethos into the Future 40, which came out a year after that, after he left. So his career is very interesting like that. So he's a graduate of Trinity College Dublin, Churchill College Cambridge, and Wolfson College Oxford. He's a Rhodes Scholar, and he holds a degree in economics, basically, from the University of Oxford, where it says it there, he's a Rhodes Scholar. So a few other things. This is a kind of a more detailed bio from Rocket Reach. And as you can see, the trajectory, basically, he does his degree, and in the 90s, he gets the master's in Cambridge, and he does his doctor of philosophy, basically, in at Oxford, and he became a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. So, but he was actually sent from the ESRI, basically, to Oxford originally. So he was sent on a grant, I believe, from the ESRI, and he also became a Rhodes Scholar. So that's a big achievement. There aren't many Irish Rhodes Scholars. They only did it for a couple of years. And of course, if going all the way back with the conspiracy lore, the Rhodes Scholarship is the kind of the kind of globalist whatever connected with Cecil Rhodes at Oxford and everything. I could talk all about that. I think it's got more relevance really as a kind of an institution of kind of technocratic kind of production. It basically creates the technocrats, and so anyway, he moves then into the in the early 2000s, then 2002, basically 2011, he was an advisor and director of policy at the leader of the Labour Party. So he served Eamon Gilmore. He served Pat Rabbitte for a while, I believe. He served. He negotiated really Labour's entry to government in 2011 when all that reforming was going on, basically, and so it's interesting timing here. So you can see here clearly, he was in the European Commission, he was in the EPSC, which is a think tank basically that existed for a few years. Now it's called something else. The European Commission changes this stuff all the time depending on who the leader is, basically. But the EPSC was like an internal think tank, so involved in future economic projections and everything. He served the Taoiseach, so that's John Burton in 2011, 2014. Then he moved in 2015. He moved from the European Commission in that role in the think tank. He moved back to he became Deputy Secretary General of the Department of Further and Higher Education. And then from 2020 to 2021, he was acting Secretary General of that department, basically, of the Department of Education. And then he moved to the Commission on Taxation and Welfare, basically became the secretary of that from 2021 to 2022 when it was doing its important report. And then he moved straight into the Economic Development Division, which is a very important institution of the Department of Finance, which produced the Future 40 reports. And now he's back in the Department of Education again. So he's jumping right back in there. And it's like this guy is very, very much a very capable guy, And so I would say this guy is really the real kind of driving force behind a lot of this, most likely, most likely. And so, yeah, this explains that he was in the ESRI from 93 to 95. He got a research fellowship to undertake the Oxford period, basically. And he also then got a Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. And then he came back then, he worked in the National Economic and Social Council, which is the very important advisory council, basically. There's a lot of the top economists and all kinds of social scientists and everything work in that. And this article then summarizes his role in 2011, basically, in negotiating Labour's entry into government. So backroom advisors can't avoid political limelight. It's the backroom advisors who dug out the party's frontline negotiators when they get bogged down in charts and statistics, in the sycamore room in government buildings. They took up their places alongside the three politicians. And it's just this guy just explaining, what was the wheeling and dealing that was going on. And when a deal is clinched and their political masters take the credit, Dr. Colm O'Reardon and Andrew McDowell will go home and prepare for government. So he was the director of policy, basically. He was in charge of policy for the Labour Party, I believe, at this point. Um, as directors of policy for Fine Gael and the Labour Party, they will also have a major role in their political bosses unite when their political bosses unite in coalition. Fine Gael's Michael Noonan, Phil Hogan, and Alan Shatter sat down yesterday, and then with Howlin, Burton, and Pat Rabbitte. And this is how the coalition came about. So he's central to creating the coalition government. He's basically the head of the policy for the entire Labour Party. And then he moves into the Department of Education and into the Department of Finance to lead, basically, because there's also the transformation of Irish education is ongoing, and as is this economic agenda, which we can clearly see. So, important guy. And I asked it to summarise Colm O'Reardon's links to the Irish Labour Party. So he was Director of Policy from 2002, basically, on economic and social issues, close advisor to Labour leaders, worked directly with Labour Party leaders, including during Eamon Gilmore's tenure, helping shape party policy and strategy. And all this stuff is backed up with links and everything. But it's a good summary. And he helped negotiate the 2011 government, which of course introduced all of this kind of social and economic change, basically. So let's briefly then explain his influence on his brother, even. I mean, Aidan O'Reardon is a school teacher by trade himself, and he has actually been very central to the transformation of Irish education. Now, he says in this Hot Press article from 20, when was this? When was this? This was 2014, November 2014. He basically says that it was his brother that really got him into the Labour Party. So he says it was around the time of the local elections 2004, the end of the dual mandate had come in. CDs weren't going to run for the local elections anymore. Blah, de blah. And he says that my brother was working for Ruairi Quinn. So Ruairi Quinn was a very important Minister for Education as well. And then for Pat Rabbitte, we had a conversation. I thought about it and I joined the party in November 2002. To be honest, I didn't join to be a member of the Labour Party. I joined to run for local election, and I was selected in May 2003. It changed things. Before that, I did a lot of work in football. It's funny that the first time I ever felt like I had achieved anything in all of my life was when I decided to set up a football team. And so his brother has had a big impact on his life and everything. And so the thing with Aidan is he's very involved in this LGBT teachers group. For example, he spoke at the 10th anniversary of this LGBT teachers group, the INTO LGBT teachers group, basically. And that's central to events basically ongoing in Irish education. That's central to the kind of queering, as it were, of Irish education. And so it's an interesting family. And Aidan was married. I believe now they're broke up, but he was married to Anya Kerr. And if you know anything about Anya Kerr was the she was involved in Storyful, Kinsen, she was she was involved in Facebook. She's on the Fujo Advisory Board, which is a very important institution based out of DCU, which appears to be very, very relevant to the Irish media landscape. So the point of all of this, and she's in Rethink Ireland as well. She's a former chair of the board of Rethink Ireland, right? So that's his ex-sister-in-law, for example. So the thing I have noticed since I've been looking into politics and all of this period, particularly following the Troika, is I've come to realize that politics and society hinges an awful lot on networks. And it's I see the chat here actually I was looking at for the first time tonight. Very funny, very funny. But the thing with politics and Irish society is that it seems to work so much on networks. And there's all of these. The Phoenix magazine, for example, is very good at mapping networks. Now that's a whole story in and of itself, because the Phoenix obviously is other people as well, and that they're part of a network, believe it or not, too. But what I have noticed is that the Labour Party seems to be able to get things done so effectively. And I think you're seeing it here with the likes of O'Reardon, and the Reardon family, basically, or the O'Reardon family. They're very, very networked. They work very diligently. And this guy, Colm is a kind of a background guy. He's someone no one really thinks about, but he's a Rhodes Scholar, incredibly competent, well respected, and he's getting things done. And the Labour Party, I believe, have had a huge part in reshaping Irish society, particularly since the 90s, but especially since 2011. Marriage equality, for example. I believe marriage equality was basically achieved by the Labour Party. That was really, and I can prove that probably through a stream we'll do some other time, when I gather that together again. But basically, the marriage equality campaign was really heavily dominated by Labour Party people. And the Labour Party going, I see actually last Fine Gael is saying it there, back to the 70s, they basically have always been becoming ministers for education. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Rory Quinn in the 90s in particular, you know, all kinds of things. I'm going to do streams on all of this. I'm going to do streams on all of it because it all needs to be explained and explored. But Labour Party, absolutely incredibly effective because they have that kind of middle class professional thing going on. And yeah, the constitutional conventions, absolutely. Chuck Feeney, all that, yeah. And aided by Feeney in the Constitutional Convention. Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Absolutely true. And so, these are all networks of kind of unrecognized kind of power, because we're all looking at politicians all the time. Even when we're looking at Adon, we're saying, oh, look at Adon, he's off now being an MEP, and look at him saying this stuff we don't like. But, the real power in Adon is his network. It's the network. And that's how institutions like Common Purpose operate. They operate because these people are all about creating networks. And I'm going to do streams on all of this. I've decided now I'm just going to start doing streams on all of this kind of on a weekly basis, pretty much, and try and lay out little pieces of this as we go along, And just to kind of finish up on that angle before we get back to the financial stuff, because I know I'm not talking about financial stuff at the minute, but just to briefly summarize all of this stuff that's going on with the LGBT and the education and everything, the Labour Party is central to this. They were central to marriage equality, and they're central to the transformation of education. This article briefly summarizes some of this, basically. So the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender teachers group of the Irish National Teachers Organisation, INTO, affiliated to Educational International. There's a whole story to that. They're all affiliated with this thing called SDG 4.7 from the Sustainable Development Goals. This is crucial information to people who are activists on the ground on the education issue, the queering of education. SDG 4.7 basically allows them to do most of this stuff. That's the kind of, and I see people are talking about this now. It is good. But anyway, another time I'll talk about it. The conference was held basically then back in 2014, and the INTO LGBT Teachers Group chairperson Anne-Marie Lillis, together with INTO Secretary General Sheila Noonan, the Minister of State for New Communities, Culture and Equality, Adon O'Reardon. So he became a minister in that government. He was the Minister of State for New Communities, Culture and Equality. So that may look like a kind of a Mickey Mouse kind of position, but that's Labour operating through institutions to get shit done. Okay. And they got shit done. So here's an example. This article summarizes it, but along with Adon was Senator Ivana Bacik, who was also a speaker. And this kind of summarizes the new Ireland that appeared at this time. So while all this economic stuff is going on, you have all this stuff going on with the social, with the LGBT and everything. And I remember that time. It was like crazy. I mean, this stuff just appeared out of nowhere. All of a sudden, when we should have been talking about economics and the fact that we were getting raped, basically, all of a sudden we're talking about gay marriage and all this kind of social radicalism, and you're kind of going like, hang on, this is not really my priority at the moment, But this conference was 10 years of this LGBT group in the INTO, and so yeah, they had the the launch of this. Yeah, here's the very important piece of legislation that they achieved. They achieved this. So she also emphasized, while the conference is a positive event for the INTO LGBT teachers group, as it goes from strength to strength, there are still serious concerns for Irish LGBT teachers due to the continued threat of discrimination caused by Section 37.1 of the Employment Equality Act. And this was Labour again. Labour were they got rid of this. Section 37.1, they had a huge campaign to do this. And that was a whole part of this LGBT push. And they achieved that. And so basically that was, and they keep framing it this way. 37.1 refers to discrimination against persons and institutions set up for religious purposes or to promote religious objectives. So basically they were saying, I have to be able to tell my students I'm gay. This was their big thing, right? And they're saying this is an affront to our rights. And so they got rid of that. That was just one of the small things they achieved. And that basically then means that they can go into the schools and they can undermine the ethos of the school, and they can basically start talking to the children about gay stuff, right? This is the Labour Party at work. And they achieved that. There's a whole story with that. Another time we'll talk about it. And here's some tweets from the event. So you have, Ivana Bacik, ICTU, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. That is the think tank which actually runs that is the umbrella union that basically runs the Nevin Economic Research Institute as well. And if you'll know, on Twitter, there's one of our favorite online Twitter accounts in Ireland is a guy from the Nevin Institute. What's his name? I can't think of his name now, but he's he's one of these rage bait accounts, which is always irritating nationalists. But he's one of these guys, he represents the trade unions basically. That's why he's winding you up. He's paid all day to do this. And also present, of course, was Panty Bliss, a huge figure in the transformation of Ireland. Panty Bliss became the symbol basically of the new Ireland at this time. And so they're all at this conference. There's Adon. There's Adon speaking. And of course, a very crucial, there's Adon again. And there, of course, one of the most notable kind of presences at this meeting, which probably people weren't thinking of too much at the time, was Aoife Neary, who is one of the principal academics who is basically transforming Irish education or queering Irish education, as was this guy called Dennis. Is it Dennis Fahy? There's I think it's Dennis Fahy, Dr. Fahy. He was also present at this meeting. And these are the two of the main academics basically behind driving all this. And they're at this LGBT teachers group. So this is the social aspect of the Labour Party, the social transformation. And now we'll get back to the economic transformation. So while Adon is doing all that, Colm is busy working through the background of the Labour Party, basically. And I'll just go back to the other tabs briefly here for a second to show you. So just to recap, Colm O'Reardon was the chair, or sorry, was the secretary to the commission. So the secretariat, which prepared the report, he was the main dude basically, and in this role, he was responsible for supporting the commission's work, coordinating its activities, and ensuring that its deliberations and outputs were effectively managed. So he's the main administrative and strategic link between the commission and the Department of Finance. So all these guys, the 13 or 14, whatever it was, these experts, whatever, that were advising. And again, some of them, if you look at some of their backgrounds, do I have a summarize of that? Yeah, here they are. Let's briefly summarize. There's Niamh Maloney. You have tax advisors. You have, for example, you have the CEO of Threshold, the housing charity. There's a whole story could be told here about housing charities and about their role in transforming society. A lot of people are complaining that there's a lot of immigrants and whatever getting these social housing and whatever. And I believe you can probably show that is actually because a lot of these institutions are the domain of people like the Labour Party. If you look at the boards of these housing charities, they are full of progressives, and many of them kind of bounce from different roles. They'll bounce from working for a politician or as a media personality or as a in some NGO or whatever, and then they'll bounce into an organization like Threshold. And these are very powerful organizations, and they have great power now, especially when housing is so scarce and so hard to get. So like they have a presence on this as well. And so you have basically all these IBEC and all, like I said. And okay, so this strategic economic development division. So when Colm basically left the commission, then when the commission finished its work, it produced the foundations for the future document, which was like the end of that commission. It ended then, right? And so then this thing called Strategic Economic Development Division within the Department of Finance was created. It's incorrectly labeled the Strategic Economic Development Unit in the Future 40 reports. I can't help but wonder if that's deliberate. I don't know why they would do that. It seems like such a simple error to make. It's almost like they don't want people kind of looking into this. But it was created 2023 as part of the restructuring under Pascal O'Donoghue. And it basically carries on the foundations for the future, basically. And it's led initially by Colm O'Reardon. And so it's very much housing policy, climate action, sustainable finance, long-term, economic and tax, viability, and it's planning for the future. And here's an explanation of its role, basically. Long-term structural issues compared to the other units within the department. And so to summarize, the Strategic Economic Development Division is Ireland's forward-looking economic unit created in 2023 to strengthen analysis of housing, climate, and sustainability while also managing the exchequer account. It complements the economic division by focusing on structural and long-term challenges. So this is the real forward-looking planning that's going on, and it's led by basically a guy that's central to the Labour Party, historically going back 20 years. And I think you're seeing here really how kind of Ireland actually works. This is like how things get done. We can argue about the minister said this, the minister said that, but we need to be really thinking about who is actually the technocrats, who are the managers. There's a great account on Twitter that does a lot of analysis of this. It's called, you'll all know it, Fianna Fáics. And Fianna Fáics is doing a really interesting project, which I'm very excited to kind of follow. And hopefully we can connect with him. I'd love to get him on to do a few streams like this. Because I've actually done research onto a lot of the things he's talking about too. I haven't talked about it publicly, but I'd love to break down institutions like the Wheel or sustainable development, whatever, and start explaining how stuff actually functions and how things actually change, the networks that are at work. And I think without that knowledge, you can't really affect change. You can't really, like something like the Strategic Economic Development Division, people don't know what that is. They don't know what this is. They have no way to interface with it. None of the perspective of regular people is really contained in any of those documents. What you have there is the analysis and the views of a kind of a narrow kind of set of postcodes in Dublin, basically, and very expensive educations in institutions like the London School of Economics or Oxford or Trinity College or whatever. And while all that gives people expertise, it gives people understanding, of course. That's not to diminish any of those things. The point is that it represents a set of values and attitudes. And without understanding those people, their networks, and their values, you don't really understand why things are happening, and you can kind of fall into a kind of a habit of being angry about things or protesting about things. But I think when you start to develop this kind of understanding, you start to get closer to kind of a theory of politics and a theory of society and history even that makes more sense. So when I look at this unit, I see this as a kind of a component really of scientific political management and economic management. And I think you have to look at the networks that are afoot here. I think you have to look at it that way. So yeah, see we have 21 watching on YouTube. I hope people are checking out the Odyssey as well. Uh, got Odyssey working at last, so I'm absolutely delighted with that. Because I can't get Rumble to work, but Odyssey is working perfectly. It looks perfect. I think there's one over there, one or two over there, so that's good. That's really good. Let me just see if I got any more notes here. I want to make sure I don't want to miss anything. So I'll just briefly summarize anyway. I think the takeaway here really is that the Labour Party in particular, as the kind of heirs of like the kind of upper middle class kind of progressive elite, really, they are the Labour Party really shine to me as the kind of the real transformative kind of project in Irish society. Like Last Gael said earlier, from the 70s, you know, they became really a middle class professional party in the 70s. And I think what you're seeing here from the 90s on, and with the rise of people like the O'Reardons and their network or whatever that you're kind of seeing in other aspects of Irish society, you can see them in the media. You can see people like Adon, for example, is very good at getting media time. I remember looking at him on American MSNBC, and I'm kind of going, how did he get on TV? Like, what's he? There are networks operating here, and I think the Labour Party are experts at wielding power. They're experts at strategic communications. They are able to present themselves in this kind of competent, because they are competent, kind of way. And even though they've never gained very many seats, they have been a driving force in Irish governments going way back, but particularly since the 90s when they became very influential in education. Uh, they have definitely got a lot of institutional support in media and communications. I think they're very effective at, like I said, strategic communications, controlling narratives. Uh, and the fact that I'm definitely going to do a stream on this now. Actually, has to be done, explaining the kind of Labour role in the marriage equality campaign and in a lot of these social kind of issues. I think what you're seeing here is the kind of embourgeoisement of Irish society, where our society is being kind of taken over by a new belief system, a kind of a new ethos has replaced the kind of old kind of values of the society. And it's because people aren't really allowed to think. There's not many commentators in the mainstream press now. Go back to the 90s, you had a Desmond Fennell or someone who would be putting out kind of narratives to counter this, and he put his finger on a lot of important things, undoubtedly, in his analysis. But aside from him, and since he's been dead, and of course John Waters was doing that, of course. So I'll have to get John on for another chat actually soon. That'd be a cool stream as well. But since Desmond Fennell and John Waters are now no longer part of the kind of mainstream furniture of Irish media, you have this kind of you have a kind of a real gap there. So the other analysis or an alternative analysis of this is just not getting it's not getting true. And so people don't think this is unusual. Ireland is actually a very unusual society when you think about it. There isn't really a kind of a right wing. There hasn't really been a right wing represented in culture, in RTE, in politics. There hasn't been allowed to be a right wing really since the 80s. I would say it goes back at least that far. And I think, yeah, someone's some saying the Michael D. Higgins is an example, was part of the Stickies and everything. Yeah. Actually, I don't think Higgins was part of the Stickies. Actually, I think he was actually not part of the Stickies. Actually, I think that might be incorrect. But a lot of the Labour Party that came in the 90s, they actually had been. Now, Pat Rabbitte and Eamon Gilmore, they had been radicals. They had been part of the Stickies, undoubtedly, and they then became mainstream political figures basically in the 90s, and then during the Troika era, or following the Troika era, these guys basically then are central to the reform of Irish society. There's that famous speech with Pat Rabbitte talking about Labour's way, or what's his name? What did he say? Or Strasbourg's way, or Labour's way. I think he said something like that famously on TV, and very clearly he didn't really mean it, But like they did get a lot of things done. Frankfurt's way, that's it. Yeah, Dahi, yeah, the Frankfurt's way or Labour's way, and these guys don't give a rat's ass because they're off, and they've all got great jobs out of this. They're flying. They're absolutely flying. So I'm going to call it a night there. I just wanted to kind of do that tonight to kind of bookend the bookend. Yeah, Last Gael confirms actually that Higgins wasn't in the Sticky. Just to be sure, just to be clear, in case anyone's watching this on playback, Higgins was not a Sticky, but Gilmore and Rabbitte very much were, and they kind of came through Democratic Left, I think it was, didn't they? I'm nearly remembering that right. But regard, we got 27 watching. I almost don't want to go now. Bloody hell! But no, I'll have to go. We'll go. I've covered what I wanted to cover. This was just a bookend to the previous stream that we did on Future 40, examining this kind of institutional restructuring that was going on following the introduction of the Troika and the complete collapse of the Irish economy in 2008 onwards. And in 2011, things were restructured. And out of this, basically, then you get this restructuring, and you get the total economic future of our country now, basically, I believe, is being directed by these groups and these people with these values, these attitudes. And there's networks afoot here, I feel. I think we're looking at networks of power, and I think this is the kind of work that I'm going to be doing as part of my ongoing kind of thing. I'm just going to be doing these little digs, and maybe I'll get, if guests want to come on here, I'm absolutely open to having guests on. There's a lot of people on Twitter that are probably going to waste. A lot of people are good researchers. If you want to come on here, reach out to me on Twitter or whatever, send a message, and maybe we can do a stream together, laying out some of these things if you got a particular interest. And I'm going to be back. My next thing that I'm going to be doing is this. I hope I can get this next article out within the week, or by next week anyway. By next week, because we're getting into the middle of this week soon. I have another article coming out. It's going to be really cool. We won't talk about it now. And there will be really, really interesting stuff to do with the origins of multiculturalism and the kind of race relations regime that we live under. Particularly, this one will focus on Britain. It builds on an article I did years ago, but it's really been improved and fleshed out more. And so I'm going to try and get that done this week and have it out next week. And so then there'll be probably a series of streams on that. We'll be exploring a lot of the material in that. There's maybe even going to be, hopefully there'll be some useful footage and things I can dig up. But if that doesn't come out, I'll do a stream next week probably anyway. And I'd love to get some guests on. If people want to come on and have a chat about things like this or the culture, if you have suggestions for guests, email me. My links are in the description. I will be back soon, hopefully within a week, with something cool. So I'm going to call it a night now for that. Thanks for hanging around with me for an hour, and I'll see you soon. Take care.